Hey guys, and welcome back to the ASX Investor channel, and welcome to another CEO interview. Today we'll be diving into the potash space. Potash is of course a key input into fertilisers, and with increased crop production and demand, with a growing population, potash is going to play an increasingly important role. However, there are some other different supply and demand dynamics that are currently playing out with everything that's occurring in terms of Europe and sanctions. And the company we'll be discussing today, Highfield Resources, ASX HFR, have been dubbed as being in the right place at the right time, with a range of different factors to consider. We're looking forward to welcoming to the channel Ignacio Salazar, the CEO of Highfield Resources. Sit back and enjoy the interview.
Welcome to the channel and enjoy.
We're going to be unpacking that story with the CEO, Ignacio Salazar. Ignacio, it's been an interesting time. Welcome to the channel. It's great to have you join us.
Thank you very much. Very glad to be here.
There's so much for us to unpack and a lot of different points to discuss. But before we get into those, maybe if you can just give that high-level overview. Who is Highfield Resources? And what's that problem that you're trying to solve within the supply chain?
So Highfield Resources, as you said, is an ASX company with one project in Spain, north of Spain, in the regions of Navarra and Aragon. And we are about to start construction of an MOP potash project. The first phase is 500,000 tons, and the second phase will take us to 1 million tons. No? The problem that we are trying to solve, well, I mean, the main point is to get the mine in construction and operating, but in the current geopolitical environment, I think it's becoming very obvious to everybody, very clear, with 1 million tons, and that is a significant number if you look at the needs of potash in Europe. The demand of potash in Europe is 7 million tons, and almost half of that used to come and has been coming from Russia and Belarus. We can talk about that later, obviously suffering from sanctions and in a very special situation. So we are talking about 3 million tons that used to come from these two countries. We will cover one out of the three in a relatively short period of time, in a couple of years. That will take us to get to construction. By the end of 24, beginning of 25, we expect to be in operation. So very, very important strategically right now in the current environment.
A globally significant project, as you've outlined with the numbers there. I think when people hear about potash, they intuitively understand it's connected to fertiliser. But can you talk about potash's role in fertiliser, and particularly with this growing population, why it's going to become more and more important?
Well, there is clear fundamentals about. Let me start with feeding the planet and these mega trends. Obviously, everybody knows the population in the planet is growing exponentially, and on the other side, arable land is decreasing. The only way to make that equation work is through fertilizers. Mineral fertilizers are the key fertilizers with capacity to make a difference in terms of returns in arable land. And we are talking about that maybe around half of the production of food production, of plant production, is thanks to fertilizers. Otherwise, the numbers will be a lot lower. So it's an extremely significant input into this equation, no? And to make it work, and only becoming more and more important. And fertilizer NPK, so it's nitrogen, phosphate, and potash. Potash is important for growth of plants, for a lot of the returns and the performance of crops, no? And to keep that going forward.
So there's already the fundamental drivers there behind the sector. But as you mentioned, the situation, I think Russia and Belarus themselves accounted for 37% of the global production. Did you want to talk about the supply and demand dynamics and everything that's changed over this past period on that front?
Absolutely. The three major country producing MOP potash in the world are: the first one is Canada, the second one is Russia, and the third one is Belarus. So as you said, between the two of them, almost 40%, 37, 38% of global production. And then you have that, when you look at Europe specifically, almost half of the demand in Europe has been covered so far with Russian and Belarus products. So it is even a bigger problem that Europe has in terms of gas. That was probably the first one that came up in the news. 40% of European gas relying on Russia. Belarus was, I mean, this is prior to the Ukraine war in Ukraine, was already sanctioned by European and American governments. So Belarus, and also being Belarus country landlocked, on the only way out through Lithuania, and being, I mean, the sanctions being applied, the restrictions are already having a significant effect. In Russia, we are only seeing the start of that, and we can only, unfortunately, expect things are going to get worse, and therefore is a significant dependency from Europe that needs to be covered. As you know, and with gas or any other raw material, I mean, you can cover these things from one day to another. These projects, you easily are talking about 10 years, 12 years to get to production. So the fact that Highfield or the Muga project is our project in Spain, is about to start construction. As you said at the beginning of the interview, is to be at the right time, at the right moment for the needs of especially European needs, but in general global needs of potash, and at the end of the day, food supply and security of supply of food.
And that leads us, I think, quite naturally then onto the Muga Potash project. There's a few interesting dynamics there in terms of shallow deposit, good surrounding infrastructure, obviously a key region within Southern Europe. Did you want to talk about what you've got on your hands there and why you're so excited about it?
We're very excited about the Muga project, and it has always been, we like to highlight the three key strategic advantages of this project when you compare to, well, our peers, other projects or mines, and the typical Canadian or Russian mines and projects. Basically, these three elements, the first one is the fact that the project is, the mineralization is quite shallow. So we will be accessing the mineralization at a depth of 350 meters. And typically these projects in as I said, Canada, Russia, etc., they are 1,000 meters deep or deeper. They have aquifers above the mineralization, something we don't have. So in these mines, you need to freeze the aquifer so to build a shaft to access mineralization at those depths. In our case, we simply will build a couple of declines, and a lot quicker and a lot easier we will act, and a lot more easy to operate. We will be accessing mineralization. That is the first point. The second point is that we are in an extremely well-developed area from an infrastructure point of view. I mean, a lot of funds, when Spain joined the European Union in '86, many of them from European funds, but others, I mean, as you can imagine, north of Spain is the way to connect Spain to the rest of Europe. So motorways, rail tracks, electricity grid, very, very, very much all of that next, very close to the mine site. We are lucky to have also the port of Bilbao, is the biggest deep water port in Spain, 200 kilometers as well from the mine site. So when you compare, once again, Canadian, Russian, other projects, they are in the middle of nowhere. They need to build all this infrastructure for the sake of that, for a high volume commodity like potash. That is transportation, logistics, very important. And the third strategic advantage, and maybe the most important one, is the location. That always was the case, the strongest point. Once again, it's not the same to be in the middle of nowhere than to be in the middle of a very intensive agricultural region in deficit of potash, like Europe as a whole, but especially the north of Spain, south of France, no? So where you have crops, cereals, well, in France, wine, and so many products, and very intensive agriculturally, no? So that is, for this type of product, has always been the biggest strategic advantage of Muga, and well, now more than ever, no, in the current geopolitical situation.
And so there's a range of key building blocks there. What's the next period look like? As mentioned, there's a two-stage process, 500,000 tonnes initially, up to the 1 million. What's that pathway towards production from here on out?
Yeah, so we got the grant of the mining concession. That was a massive milestone for the company, and after a thorough and long process, that was 1st of July 2021. We've been since then working on several work streams, just what we call preparation for construction. The main one has been, or the one that has been dictating the broader timeline, is the project finance and the financing part in terms of debt with banks, and we've announced significant progress with the syndicate of banks, SocGen, BNP Paribas, Natixis, and ING. So very, very strong banks with a lot of knowledge and expertise in this area. And so we are signed a mandate for 312 million euros. We are looking for a 400 million euro capex for this initial phase. Running in parallel, we see a lot of interest from potential strategic investors as well. As you can imagine, people or groups, companies that used to be supplied by Russia and Belarus, looking for alternative sources of supply, among other type of strategic interest, while at the same time working with the contractors, preparing the construction agreements, and finalizing, still is a couple of administrative licenses with the municipalities. In this case, any construction requires the municipality to confirm a construction license. So the idea is to work all of that in parallel. Is a sort of, getting everybody running at the same pace, not always easy. So in the middle of the year, the summer here in Spain, we are ready and starting construction in the second half of this year indeed.
On the pathway towards construction, it's an exciting time. Just wanted to open up the floor for you. Did you have any final reflections for those looking at the Highfield Resources story, or anything that you wanted to leave those longer term shareholders with?
No, extremely exciting times. I mean, I think everybody realized I was a few weeks ago in Australia with investors as well in London. No doubt in the finance community, people realize the strategic importance of Muga. Locally as well, the governments, local governments, national governments, European governments, I think see that value becoming very, very increasing in relevance in the current environment. I mean, we didn't discuss much about from an environmental perspective. This is, I like to say, some of the people here talk about a 21st century. I think it's a pioneer in the 21st century with things like backfilling. We will leave no residues on surface. In ESG, a very strong credentials in this company, and also, well, as some other of these projects working in an area that is suffering from the population, is a lot of benefits, and a lot of strong local support of moving forward. So very keen to start with boots on the ground, as they like to say, just starting the construction and getting into operations and producing potash as soon as possible.
Boots on the ground, shovels in the dirt. That is the Highfield Resources story up ahead. It's ASX HFR. Ignacio Salazar, big thank you for joining us on the channel, and look forward to seeing what's up ahead for Highfield Resources.
No, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for your interest and time. Thanks.